Happy fall, y'all. Thanks for joining in when it's convenient for you to stop by and check out Bible study. We have a non-religious approach to reading the ancient texts and being able to understand what was being said in the context that it was written in, the time period it was written in, and how we can apply the principles into everyday life. My name is Patty Baker, and it's my pleasure to walk you through the book of Acts. We are in Acts 22. We're going to read verses 22 through 29 tonight. We're talking about the life of Paul, and I hope that if you've been joining for a while that you're enjoying this study. We've got just a few more chapters to dive into, and then I think that'll take us to the end of the year. And then after that, well, we'll have you vote. See what book you would like to dive into next. I also want to let you know, if it's your first time joining, just plug in right here. You're not missing anything. You'll get something out of tonight. It's here for everybody. Let's go into a little backstory about where we were last week. So Paul is being dragged out of the temple by this angry Jewish mob of men because there's been this false accusation that he brought in a non-Jew into the temple, and that he's going around telling people that who are not Jews that they don't have to be a Jew in order to get to God, and that he is not following Jewish law. So as this mob drags him out into the street, somebody gets a hold of the Roman commander of that area, because it's under Jerusalem was under Roman rule at that time. And the commander comes over with some soldiers, snatches him up, takes him over to the barracks, and just till we can figure out what's going on, right? Because the commander can't even understand. There's so much going on in the street. And as he takes him almost into the barracks, he's standing on the top step there, and he says, hey. He talks to him in Greek, and he says, can I just speak to them for a minute? And he's like, oh, well, sure. Obviously the commander thought he was some Egyptian rebel or something that had killed a bunch of people, and that's who this was. But he's plain clothes, who knew who this dude is. So he says to Paul, sure. So Paul turns around, starts speaking in Aramaic, which was the language of the Jews at that time. And he, is gaining attention. And Greek for the Romans, Aramaic for the Jews, and Paul was fluent in both. He used it to build rapport, and it shows his understanding of both the Roman worlds and the Jewish worlds. And he shared his credentials. He shared how he was trained by a devout teacher and leader in the Jewish community named Gamaliel, who was, and the fact that Paul was once a fierce persecutor of those who followed the ways of Jesus. And he had recounted this dramatic experience that he had on the road to Damascus, and he explained how he was blinded during his trip, and sent him to Damascus, where he met up with Ananias, who not only restored his sight miraculously by the power of the Great Spirit, but also confirmed God's call on his life. And so Paul told these Jews who were quiet now listening to him, because, okay, we're good. You're one of us. All right, we're doing good. So then Paul tells them he went back to Jerusalem, and he had a vision from the great Creator. God told him to leave Jerusalem and to take this message that he understood, that getting to God didn't mean having to get to the synagogue, basically, and then recounted the life of Jesus, the power of the Holy Spirit, and people were coming into a relationship with God, and not just religious people, everybody. God created everybody. And the Jews listened quietly until that point. And then soon as Paul mentioned about the non-Jews, the fury reignited. And so where we're going to start tonight is to see what happens next. I'm starting in Acts 22, verse 22. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this, and then they raised their voices and they shouted, "Rid the earth of him. He is not fit to live." Many in the crowd were angry that Paul was seen as teaching against the religious laws, but I will submit to you this. When he said that God's mission included non-religious people, it violated a sense of the Jews having religious superiority. And it was also cultural superiority, right? So it's one thing to be a Jew culturally and religiously. So that's why you hear non-practicing Jews, because they're still culturally Jew, but they don't actively practice. Or you hear this in many religions. Catholicism is another one. Non-practicing Catholic or devout Catholic. It means we do both, right? Culturally and religiously. So the crowd exploded, right? Rid him of the earth. I read on. As they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, the commander ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. He directed him to be flogged and interrogated in order to find out why the people were shouting at him like this. And as they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?" And when the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "This man is a Roman citizen." So Roman citizens had specific rights during this time, and they could not be flogged or tortured or interrogated without a trial. And they had the right to a proper hearing and protection from punishment, especially degrading punishment. And flogging a Roman citizen illegally was a very serious offense, not only for the officer or the centurion who was doing it, but the officer who commanded it. So when the centurion found out, he panicked. He went to the commander and said, "What are you going to do about this?" And this caused alarm, right? Because they had already put Paul in chains. You can't even put a Roman in chains, okay? And which in and of itself is a violation of Roman law because it's done without due process. And it wasn't a miracle that stopped Paul's beating. I think oftentimes like, oh, when God saved him in the moment. He had a legal right and he chose to speak up. Embedded in the Roman system was protection, but it required Paul to have to stand up for his right. My point tonight in one of the lessons that we can learn here is we should not be afraid to speak up for what matters. As the soldiers prepared to flog Paul, he asked them whether it was legal for them to beat him because he's a Roman citizen. And we must use wisdom and take courage to speak up when our rights, our values, and our boundaries are being violated. Oftentimes, people just don't know. And if we don't stand up for our rights, we don't stand up for our values, for ourselves, we don't stand up for our boundaries. When they're being violated, who's standing up for us? And I understand that sometimes we submit to authority in our home, in our workplace, in our school system, in the community, in our government. But if our rights are being violated, our values are being violated, our boundaries are being violated, we have every right to take courage and stand up for ourselves. Ordinary systems, laws, procedures, conversations don't overlook the natural ways that God provides for us. And those systems are in place for us, but only if we activate them through our voice, if they're being violated. I read on in Acts 22. The commander then went to Paul and said, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes, I am," he answered. And then the commander said, "I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." Paul said, "But I was born a citizen." This exchange here, folks, is very telling because purchasing citizenship, like the commanders, was rare and it was costly. It could have been granted by a bribe or a favor, or his military service could have got him that. Born citizenship, like Paul's, meant that he came from a Roman colony, a Roman family in that colony that had long-standing rights. He didn't buy his citizenship. He was born into his citizenship. And Paul's statement here meant that it elevated his status in the eyes of the Romans, because he can't be flogged. He's not a Jew. He's not an Egyptian. He's not anybody. He's a Roman. And he wasn't just a Roman. He was born into it. So he came from Tarsus and Cilicia. It's a Roman free city. So I got to thinking about this as we've been studying. This was my curiosity. Paul asked the Roman commander if he could speak to the Jews before he was taken inside the barracks. And the commander, because he spoke in Greek, said, sure. But then when Paul spoke to the crowd, he spoke in Aramaic. And one of the first things that he said was, I am a Jew. I was born in Tarsus in Cilicia. My parents sent me here as a young child, and I was trained up and raised in the Jewish law under Gamaliel, a leader in the Jewish synagogue. But he's speaking in Aramaic. So the commander's not picking up on all this. So this is why this is all coming together now for this commander in this moment. Because he assumed at first that Paul was a criminal and possibly this Egyptian rebel that had come up back in Acts 21 when we studied that, who had led like 4,000 assassins in the wilderness. So that's who he originally assumed that he was. I want to talk for a second about your citizenship. Paul was a Roman citizen, legal status to protect him. God can use your education, your background, your passport, your position as a tool for his purposes, and nothing in your story is wasted. I know people who are dear friends of mine who have bought their citizenship to be here in this country. It was a high price to pay. Yeah, you can fill out the forms and go through the process. I think it's $761 now. But then you got to wait years, 4 or 5 years. Or you can hire an attorney for $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. and still sit and wait 2 or 3 years. It's not an easy process. And although it, as the commander said, mine was costly, it's still costly today. And if you've been blessed to be born in this country, you really don't know what one has to go through unless you know someone who has. The struggle it does take to become a legal citizen. And I highly respect those I know and those I don't know, but especially those I know who have done legally everything that they needed to do in order to become a United States citizen. And if you are one of those, I thank you so much for honoring the law in our country to be able to do the work. It's costly, takes time, and your perseverance. And I consider you a fellow citizen. The other thing I want to say here is that God doesn't just use citizenship, right? He can use your education. He can use your background, your passport, anything. I just recently went on vacation to Niagara Falls with a group of people, including my fiance, and he had booked this wonderful trip for us. And and my family friends, right? So my family friends and friends of his, and we all went, had a blast. And I'm making sure prior to the trip that everybody has their passport, because we can go to the Canadian side as American citizens. And everybody's got their passport and they've done their due diligence to get it. And the day before, I take mine out and it's expired. Oh, are you kidding me? Yeah, it expired. So what do? The day before I have to fly out, I call everywhere that I can. I find out that I can fly into Washington, D.C. I can make an appointment for the next morning. I can have a letter that says for the reason I need to be there. I have to have a hotel that's over there. I have to prove that there's business over there. I have to do all of these things. And I'm prepared to work everything that I can to legally be there. Because I know you just can't get across unless you have a passport. It's the rules. And my fiance, who had been there before, said, no, you're not doing all of that. We don't need to go there. We don't. You're good. We'll stay in the U.S. side. We can go another time and visit the other side. And the others can go. And we'll stay behind. And I'll stay with you. And it made me think, there are times when maybe we don't have it all together. And maybe that may cause some of us to stay behind as a result, or to help each other along in the process. And so think about what that may look like in your life with regards to education and background and position, passport, citizenship. I read on. Those who were about to interrogate Paul withdrew immediately, and the commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, even in chains. So, I pause here to say this. If this gets reported, this commander, who had bought and paid dearly for his citizenship and is a commander here, could be faced with demotion. He could be faced with fines and most likely lose his command because he chained a Roman citizen, almost flogged him without a trial, and based on what we have here, has done all that on false assumptions. So everyone's backed away, and the tone toward Paul immediately shifts. The final point here is timing is everything. which is the title of this message this week. Timing is everything. Paul didn't announce his Roman citizenship when he was first arrested. He waited until it would have the greatest impact for him, right before the flogging. Chains? Okay. Hang out in the barracks? All right. Try to appeal to the Jews? It didn't work out. Now we're going to get flogged and interrogated. Here's my card. Right? Symbolically. And discernment takes precedence. You have to have discernment and use wisdom on when to speak strategically and with tact. You have to wait until the timing is right. You have to know when to wait. That's critical. And when to speak. Because the timing will shift an entire situation. Once that commander learned that Paul was a Roman citizen, he was alarmed. And he'd already bound Paul unlawfully. And Roman laws held these commanders responsible for mistreating Romans. It was serious. So positions of power come with responsibility as well. Let's not forget that. And that everyone is accountable to treat others well. That's the bonus for tonight. That if you are in a position of power, authority over others, especially those who have rights, that you would respectfully provide dignity, and that you wouldn't be immediately jumping to conclusions with people. And some people, we make false assumptions without getting all of the information because of appearance, because of how they speak, so because of where they're located. So think about that. So as we leave tonight, the commander is in a quandary. We have a Roman here in chains, getting ready to be flogged. This could cost him his career. Next week, we'll find out what the commander does in this moment with Paul. Until we meet again next week, love God, love others, love yourself.